Take your Bibles, please, and turn to Jeremiah, the 25th chapter. We're in the midst of that study, and we'll finish up lesson 6 on that particular chapter. What Jeremiah does, he lays some groundwork for us that allows us to kind of have some dates in mind. We'll find that Josiah was, of course, the father of Jehoiakim, and we're in the 4th year of Jehoiakim. That's 605. Because 609 is where Josiah died. He began to reign in 640. 31 years is how long he reigned. And therefore we have this timeline. You've got Nebuchadrezzar, known as Nebuchadnezzar, who 605 destroys Egypt in Carchemish. That becomes Jeremiah refers to the Chaldeans coming and taking care of that. Of course, Josiah got involved with trying to defeat the kings, and he was killed. But here Nebuchadnezzar does take them, and around 604 he's standing in the plains of Gaza, and he is involved in destroying that, which is indeed one of the nations that indeed Babylon would destroy. So he speaks about, I've been here prophesying to you how many years? 23 years. We've been prophesying unto them. And we just asked the question in our lesson, how successful was he? They did not hearken, did they? And that would be the correct answer. Verse 3 says, from the 13th year of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, even unto this day, these 23 years, the word of Jehovah hath come unto me. I've spoken unto you, and this is a phrase, so I'm sending it to you early so you could understand it and see it. I'm not being late to you. I'm speaking early in the sense of that's the meaning of the phrase, rising up early, speaking, but ye have not hearkened. And so this unfolds for us the judgment that will come upon God's people, Judah. That's kind of what we're looking at, but it branches off into the nations before we're through with chapter 25. And because this is such a pivotal point, we'll pick it up in chapter 36. We'll pick it up in 6 chapters at the end of the book of the fact that he is being a prophet unto the nations. Now, remind you, in Jeremiah 1 and verse 5, that was part of his work as a prophet. You think about it, he's a crying prophet going to the people of Israel, Judah, and they don't listen to him. That's true. But notice what he was commissioned to do in verse 5. I formed thee in the belly. He said, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew you. Before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee and appointed thee a prophet unto the what? I thought it was just Judah. Well, they'd be included in the nations. But it broadens it up. I'm going to be Edom. I'm going to be dealing with the Medes. I'm going to be dealing with all the people and nations round about. Babylon is going to be a world empire. But as we'll see here, they're going to be taken down by God. And God will destroy them. And we want to see how that unfolds. And then pay a little attention to an introduction here that we'll just see coming in chapter 36, coming back in chapter 46, to know that by the time we're reading this chapter, he's already, the elements in chapter 46 and 51 have already been written. He's already prophesied of the nations. And we're just picking up a point, and we need to find out why is he doing that here. And we'll answer that as we continue. How long does Jeremiah say the people will be in captivity? And we'd hit on this, but let's just start there. You know, they say, well, just generally, but it's 70 years. And when you go 606, when deportation began until 536, that is literally 70 years. That's how God prophesies. He gives specific predictions. But they're not predictions. This is thus saith the Lord, and they happen that way. So in the midst of telling how long this would be, and that it indeed would come upon they'll be in captivity that length of time, what do we see happening, and this is where we start today, what would happen to Babylon after this time? So let's just pause here and let's go to, I'll just, since we're going to be studying chapter 36 on, but let's look at chapter 46. And notice what and this is where it gives you this 605, 604 time frame in history. The word of Jeremiah, which came to Jehovah, which came to Jeremiah the prophet concerning the nations. Well, I just thought we already studied that. Well, this is probably written first, and we'll explain why. It says, of Egypt, that's where we're going to start in our study tonight. Of Egypt, concerning that of Pharaoh, Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates, in Carchemish, when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, smote in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, 605 BC. 609 BC is when Josiah is killed. 605 will be the 4th year of Jehoiakim's reign. Just precise, and we can get those dates in our mind and realize it's not going to be contradicted anywhere else. But he mentions what took place, Carchemish, what took place. Very significant battle. And Egypt goes hightailing it back. And Nebuchadnezzar is going to go home and realize he deals with his father, and father's going to die, and he's going to be back on the plains of the Philistines in 604 BC, taking one of the great cities of the Philistines. And they are mentioned too. But so we see this beginning, but notice at the end of the nations, and all these nations, and we'll be hitting some of those, talking about some of those tonight, but we come to chapter 50, and he says, the word that Jehovah spake concerning Babylon, concerning the land of the Chaldeans, by Jeremiah the prophet, and he saves them for last. And he speaks of what will happen unto them. And so we want to ask the question that when we see this, why do we have it repeated? And it's not exactly the same, but we have it in the midst of what he's going to do to Babylon. And then he's speaking to the nations. And to properly interpret the nations, they haven't had the sword put to them yet. They didn't have it. They weren't drinking the cup of wrath. But he said, you're going to. You're going to. If you think you're not, you're going to. Who's going to bring these nations down? Which kingdom would do that? Would be the hand of God in bringing that to pass. Babylon. But Babylon would pay for this. This is the way I'm looking at this. So one of the interesting places we have to get our minds is, and anybody does, whether what position you take, is notice as he begins here in verse 13. Let me just see where I want to begin to make this point. Let's begin with verse 12. It shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished, I will punish who? King of Babylon. And that nation, said Jehovah, for their iniquity. Whose iniquity? Babylon's iniquity. And the land of the Chaldeans. That's just another way of saying Babylon. That's the people. And I will make it, that land, a desolate forever. So in verse 12, do you think all of those things are talking about Babylon and the Chaldeans? Yeah. Why wouldn't you? That's how it reads. And I will bring upon that land, what land? Maybe it's still Babylon. All the words which I pronounced against it, even all that is written in the book which Jeremiah the prophet against all the nations, which he already has, as we read chapters 46 through 51. Chapter 36 is where he writes the book. And well, it hadn't been written yet. It had already written. This is just taking from that and inserting it at a particular place for a particular reason. And I want to know why. I'd like to know why. God doesn't tell. This is why I did that. But you can read between the lines, and you're going to have to with this verse. When he speaks about against it, even all that was written in this book, when Jeremiah hath prophesied against all the nations, for explanation, for many nations and great kings shall make bondmen of them. Who's them? Even of them. I will recompense them according to their deeds, according to the work of their hands. For thus said Jehovah, take this cup and take it to the nations. If you take verse 14 out of it, and you end up with verse 13, that is written the book which prophesied against all the nations, would verse 15 read pretty well to you? Kind of flow? What he's prophesied against all the nations. Chapter 36 tells you we'll get the history later on of when he wrote the book about the nations, and 46 through 51 to tell you about the nations. And it would seem to me that if you took 14 out, which we can't because it's here, but we can understand why maybe it was placed here, because it's looking down in the future that after Babylon takes care of these nations, God is going to take care of Babylon. Who did the forced labor on the nations? Well, if I was the people of Judah, I think he did it on us. We went where? We went to Babylonian, what did you call that in class? Captivity. We went in captivity. We belong to somebody else right now. And they brought forced labor on all the nations, and the nations are going to bring it on them. And this is going to be the result. So now he unfolds for us what the nations are going to have to experience, looking ahead of that, the fact that because of that forced labor, it'll return upon the head of Babylon through nations that we'll find that Babylon's captured and conquered and be under the rule of nations. And I think it's placed there just to fast forward and to see that, well, nations, you need to realize, and Jeremiah's going to put a yoke on himself, and he's going to the people and say, this is going to be what we need to do, go under the yoke. And they say, no, we don't want that. We're not going to be under the yoke of anybody. Well, if you don't, you're going to suffer the sword. If you do, I might allow you to stay in your land. We'll read that in Jeremiah. And that goes against us fighting for our land and fighting for what we do. But when God's prophet is taking a yoke and putting it on himself, prophesying to the people, and as you'll see here, he's speaking about that. You think you won't drink this cup of God's wrath that's coming upon the nations of what y'all have done? I'm going to bring Babylon on you, including my people. And the return is that you're going to face forced labor upon you, the Chaldeans, the king, the nation. The land is desolate, and you will be taken. To me, that makes some sense. And what we begin to realize is that here he speaks about the nations. We know Babylon's going to be the end of when he wrote the book about the nations. Babylon will be the end. And he's just telling you, this is, for many nations, a great king shall make bondmen of thee. We'll force you to labor. I will use nations to destroy nations. There'll be nations that destroy you. We start with the Medes and the Persians. And that coincides with history, coincides with the rest of this book. And so we realize that there are things that, well, we're just repeating. And why is it here? Because this is the introduction of God's power over all the nations, and it's in the context, I'm bringing this on my people. Because my people have gone into idolatry. My people have forgotten me. I've sent my prophet Jeremiah, he gives that historical point. I've sent him to you. Been early and spoke early to you, and you have not hearkened. You have not hearkened, verse 3. So I just laid that out as we look at the details now of the judgments that are going to come upon the people. I hope you have a mental map, because I think that's the best way to look at things. Some of these places we don't know where they can exist, but just kind of gradually follow the map, because a lot of times that's what the Bible does. Like the land being divided up, you kind of come from the south and we'll just move around till we go way north. And that's what we see happening, I think, here. And I think we'll be able to point that out to you. Any comments or questions you might have about what would happen to Babylon? They're going to be the king, and the land's going to be desolate, and they're going to suffer kind of the same punishment that they give the others. Okay. One New Testament passage is similar, and I guess I'll black that out because I want to do this with what we have between verses 15 through 26. 2 times in this section, it's in the context of God speaking to his prophet Jeremiah about the nations. For thus saith Jehovah, the God of Israel, unto me. Who's me? Jeremiah. Take this cup of wine of wrath at my hand, and cause all the nations to whom I send thee to drink. Well, you're prophet to the nations. That's chapter 1 and verse 5. All that fits. And they shall drink and reel to and fro and be mad. Kind of like a drunken stupor, and all the pain goes with that. Because of what? 2 times in these sections, you're going to tell you what the drinking the cup of the wrath is. That's symbolic of what? Reality. The sword. That's the God's wrath. That's what they will face. Because of the sword that I will send among them. I'm sending you with drink the cup of God's wrath. Symbolic. The reality that steel and the beheading and that sort of thing. Then we pick up in verse 27. Thou shalt say unto them, thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, drink ye and be drunken and spew and fall and rise no more, because this sword will I send among you. Well, why are you talking about the cup of wrath? Because that's what the sword is. It's the instrument of God's wrath. Drink it. No. Drink it. Because you're going to drink it. And we may say all the time, well, my nation can't be destroyed, Jeremiah had false prophets in his day saying it's not going to happen, peace, peace. And he said, there is no peace. Not when you're conflicting with God's law. And so Jeremiah refers to things he's already written down, and as we'll see unfold in the other chapters. But he's bringing this, that it's going to happen to the nation. So let's just quickly, any comments or questions you might have concerning that so far? So there's the 2 sections that says, he's just talking to Jeremiah, this is what I want you to go do with the nations. You're a prophet of the nations. You know that, Jeremiah? Yeah, I do. So he's doing that. So what does he start with in verse 19? Egypt, just like he does in chapter 46. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and his servants, and his princes, and all his people, and all the mingled people, and all the kings of the land of Uz. Job was from the land of Uz, but there are other Uz's in the Bible. And when we start south in Egypt, and we go across the Red Sea, we're on the Arabian Peninsula. Between that and the southern coast and the eastern coast of Palestine, which we know the Philistia, he'll speak of them next, we have this Uz. And it very well could be south of Edom, south of the Dead Sea. And it just I just went over the Red Sea and I'm hitting Uz. That's not where Job was necessarily from. He may have been more of one up in the Mesopotamia area. So, well, Job's from Uz. But there's apparently more than one. And this would be the southern one that we're looking at here. And so they're mingled people, they're mixed races. And why would we have that? How do we get to Samaritans anyway? What were countries willing to do? To keep them from being strong again, he would mingle them, and he would bring nations and mingle them with the others. And so this is what had happened before with other leaders and all the kings of the land of Uz. And all the kings, and it just kind of heading west toward the Philistia coast in the Mediterranean. He says, and the kings of the land of the Philistines. Are these cities very prominent among the Philistines? Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and the remnant of Ashdod? Yep. They're all going to drink the God's wrath. And already one of them's taken out in history by Nebuchadnezzar. He's been on about 604. He's already taken one of them out. And that's what we see with Gaza. That's going to happen, and it was already beginning during this time, maybe a year away from taking place. So we have that eastern coast. Now let's go south. Let's go south of the Dead Sea. Get a little horseshoe. I've got Judea, and you got Edom, and you got Moab. That's just kind of around the Dead Sea, and that's kind of those we all know those as nations. So we've come south Egypt. We come to us in the area of Petrea, and we're going to we're going west. Now we're coming around the Dead Sea, and mentioning Edom and Moab and the children of Ammon. We're probably familiar with those. And then as we head further northward, but we're going on that, we're looking at the boundaries toward the Mediterranean, we pick up what? Two cities? Tyre, and all the kings of Sidon, and kings of the Isle, which may be Crete, which is beyond the sea. And then we pick up with Dedan, Tema, and Buz. How'd you like to be from the city of Buz? I least like saying the word. But Dedan, that's, you go across the Red Sea, and then you go into Arabia and the wilderness there, going toward the Persian Gulf. You have Dedan, and these, and we don't know where Buz is. I couldn't find it. People say, well, it's not real certain. But Demon's pretty well recognized, and if this would be part of that. And so, but he says, Buz and all that have the corners of their hair cut off. Why do you put that in there? Because the word Buz means around the fringes, about the fringes. And he very well could be not talking about what the people did, and their idea of cutting their hair like that, like nations did, and especially at times of mourning. That would be a time of wrath for God. But it was on the fringes of the wilderness of Arabia. That's probably why it got its name. And that's what we're seeing here. It cuts the corners of their hair has been added to the text. So it just cuts the corners. That's part of the wilderness that we're looking at. And all the kings of Arabia, that'd be real close to all that. And all the kings of the mingled people, so forth, that dwell in the wilderness. And it says all the kings of Zimra, all the kings of Elam and the Medes. Elam and the Medes, I'm up to around Babylon. In fact, I'm east of Babylon. And those particular nations up there, especially they're going to meet the wrath of God too. And all the kings, that's why we're up there north, all the kings of the north, and all the kingdoms of the world, as he's taken us south, all around the known world at that time, connected with Judah, which are upon the face of the earth, and the king of Shishak shall drink after them, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. We kind of hit that last time. So what would be the last one of the nations that we'll be talking about in chapters 46 through 51? What's the last one? This might be Babylon. It was just another way of saying Babylon where people might not know it, just in case you hear people upset. But that's for some reason it was a covert name, so you wouldn't recognize who it was. But God doesn't mind saying Babylon to the prophets, so I'm not sure about that interpretation. But we'll see as we'll get into 46 through 51. God will tell you it's Babylon, and we'll look in that. 51, 41, I think is where we find that. How is Shishak taken? The praise of the whole earth seized. How has Babylon become a desolation? There's the answer. And that's another name given for it. And we'll see that in this book, and what's contained in the book of chapter 36 in those six chapters. Any questions along who these kingdoms were And just kind of take a mental map that when you see them, you'll kind of be able to put them someplace in your head. And they kind of go south, north, they go east, west, the whole earth, as they were talking about there. Okay, so let's pick back up. What is the New Testament passage similar to chapter 25 and verse 29? So I'm reading verse 27. And thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, Drink ye, and be drunken, and spew, and fall, because you're reeling because of pain and destruction and sword, and rise no more, because of the sword which I will send among you. And it shall be, if they refuse to take the cup of thy hand to drink. I'm not saying that he wouldn't illustrate that with a cup, real cup, but the sword, the wrath, is going to be with the sword. If they refuse to take the cup at the hand to drink, then shalt thou say unto them, Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, Ye shall surely drink. For lo, I begin to work an evil at the city which is called by my name. And should ye be utterly punished? He said, I'll begin to work an evil. I'm going to bring judgment. That's what he means by evil, because you don't like it. It's not morally evil. Why is it not morally evil? Because God says you deserve it. Your judgment, the evil that you've been doing against my law, I'm going to bring that which is discomforting to you. Sometimes the Bible speaks of evil in that sense. In fact, it does a lot of times. And you've got to get that in your head. Context is going to determine that. God is the inventor of evil. Well, Isaiah, you don't say that. Yeah, I'll say it. He's the one that brings evil to you. And sometimes you're in those contexts, and it's good to know that what evil means is that I'm suffering evil. I'm suffering that which I don't want. So I'm considering that as evil because it's hurtful and hurts. And Job talked about the evil that he received. And he's questioning God about it. That's true. But it's not the fact that God doesn't do evil. And yet he does in another sense. Because he brings judgment that you don't want. And that's sometimes what evil is. And he said, it'll come upon you. So if I begin to work evil at the city which is called by my name. It says, and ye should be utterly unpunished? Is there a New Testament verse that would say, yeah, this happens, this is a principle of God. And it happens with his people. Jerusalem, where his name was, because that's where the temple was. Anybody have a passage that would illustrate that? David? Okay. And very clearly it speaks about the fact I came to you and you didn't hearken. So that fits with Jeremiah, where he says, I came early and you refused, and I would have gathered you chicks under my wing, but you would not. So he brings forth the punishment, judgment. So judgment would come upon his people. So that's true. Is there something that says, hey, if I'm going to do it to my people, I'm surely going to do it to you, and you think they're going to be unpunished? Do we have a passage like that? Yes. Let's turn to 1 Peter 4:17. 1 Peter 4:17, I think, is a good one. Let's read it together. For the time has come for judgment, to begin where? To the point. To begin where? At the house of God. And if it begin first at us, what shall be the end of them that obey not the gospel of God? I think that's a very good one as well. And it's to the point that what will happen, what's going to happen if we don't obey the gospel? And it's in the context, don't think it's strange in verse 12 when you're suffering fiery trial. that something strange has happened to you. So he's trying to comfort the Christian in his suffering and the fact that it is indeed going to come upon you. Verse 14, if you're reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are ye, because of the Spirit of glory and the Spirit of God rests upon you. So he's bringing this, it's not a judgment of sin, but it illustrates the fact that I will allow evil to come upon my people. Evil because it hurts, not because they've sinned. In this case, God's people will sin. So that's the point. It just illustrating, like we're talking about, God will judge his people, like we see in Matthew 24. But here's the point about comparing it to others. If I'm willing to do that to my people, what do you think is going to happen to you in eternity from the same God that do not obey the gospel of God? That is a rhetorical question. Could someone answer it for me, since it's rhetorical? I'm going to bring something far more than what they're suffering for. I'm going to save their souls. But where do you go when you don't obey the gospel of God? 2 Thessalonians 1 is not good. And that know not God and then obey not the gospel, it'll be eternal destruction. And I think that is so if the righteous is scarcely saved, he just barely makes it. No, it's difficulty. If he goes through life and he suffers persecution, that's the evil. That's the difficulty that comes upon us. If the righteous are scarcely saved, where shall the ungodly and sinner appear? It won't be good for them. They'll be lost forever. That's how God deals with that issue. Job suffered evil, but it wasn't because he sinned. Persecuted Christians suffered evil not because they sinned. It's because they're righteous and the glory of God rests upon you. Just go through that and you'll be saved. But if he allows that to happen to his people, and in Jeremiah's case, they have sinned, they are deserving of this, they've had the opportunity to change the ways, and they've refused to hear. If that's the case, then I'm bringing it upon, in fact, this whole chapter is about them. But that the nations say, you think you're going to be unpunished because I'm beginning with evil upon my people here down the road? Babylon's going to take you, and I'll take care of Babylon. I think that's the mindset that we're looking at. Any comments or questions you want to add to that? Okay. Reading verses 25 to 30 through 38, describe the roar of God. So why would we? What kind of roar? Which animal is it? Is it women's? Hear me roar? It's a lion. And at the verse 38, he left his covert as the lion. Now he's roaring, beginning with verse 30. Is a mighty roar against the foe. He will give a shout at they that tread the grapes against all the inhabitants of the earth. There's a punishment, there's wrath coming from. A noise shall come even to the end of the earth. Roar is going to be heard worldwide. We just looked at the nations of the world. For Jehovah hath controversy with the nations. He will enter into the judgment with all flesh. For the wicked he shall give them to the sword, saith Jehovah. And that starts with my people. They're going to go under the Babylonian sword as well. Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, behold, evil go forth from nation to nation. Verse 33, the slain of Jehovah. See, God slays them by the instrument of the Babylonian sword. One end of the earth to the other. Verse 34, wail ye shepherds and cry. It's very much involved with the leaders of Jerusalem and Judah. Even though the nations are being talked about, they're being brought in. This is the worldwide judgment upon them, including my people, plus all the other nations. For the days of your slaughter and your dispersions are fully come. Your sheep are going away, you leaders, and they're going to captivity. Those that survive the sword. And the shepherds have no way to flee, nor the principal of the flock to escape. their principal lambs, their prized possessions. They're fleeing and they can't save. I mean, they're all escaping. A voice of the cry of the shepherds, the waiting of the principal of the flock, for Jehovah layeth waste their pasture. Layeth waste their pasture. That's where they fed. That's where they got their nourishment. That's where they felt safety. And the shepherd, all that is disrupted. And the peaceable folds are brought to silence because of the fierce anger of Jehovah. To me, that's a sobering statement. After the storm, after the bomb goes off, after the dead bodies and all the crying and the anguish and all of those things happen, you just name the catastrophe. What a moment it is when reality sets in, and it sets in the room of silence. You can't change it. It's a catastrophe. And I wasn't silent in getting you to repent. I wasn't silent. But now, it's just eerie. Because the silence has come. And he hath left his covert as the lion. For the land has become an astonishment because of the fierceness of the oppressing sword, because of his fierce anger. Wrath of God coming upon my people. It'll come upon the nations. And the last nation we talk about is going to be that, we talked about here, the Shishak. We'll talk about that. Anything you want to add before we go to, I think our time is about up, so we may start. We can start there. How extensive was Jeremiah to present the word of Jehovah? How extensive was that? And that's kind of where we're going to begin. Because I'm not asking you where he would teach or anything like that, but because I'm asking that question later on. So here is just how extensive it is. And what's that? Yes, that's the point. All I command, and you're not supposed to depreciate from it. All that I've commanded that you should obey. That's how extensive his word is. He's going to give all of what God has said, and you're not going to diminish from it. That's kind of like speak where the Bible speaks and be silent where it's silent. It's like that you're going to have to do all the commandments of God, and you cannot leave any behind. So that's how extensive it is. And now we'll put it in places where he is when he makes those. And Lord willing, we'll get that next time. Anything you'd like to say before we close? Okay, thank you for being here and participating.